Hey, you guys, can you give me 1 minute? I'll be right back. Is that right? I can't hear you, so you're gonna have to work that out.
We're muted, but we were saying yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you guys look more like definitely a heavy metal trio at this point.
Oh, that was like the most. Get my guitar. Yeah.
I'll be right
All
back.
right,
Second.
finish it. No worries.
All right. All right. All right. All right.
So I was waiting for the final nose blowing. There we go. Howdy.
Howdy.
Hello. So you probably hear us like just mono one side, right? Because we switched to a fully mono mic.
I,
Is
I
that
I
an
hear you
issue?
right down the center.
Oh, amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
We are indeed centered. How are you doing?
I'm okay. I'm all right. I so this is like a I just wanted like a kind of short take. Um
Go for it.
well, not, not just like, hey, give me the top line. Okay, next story. But because I think you guys are saying something interesting and important in that essay. And yeah, so I just wanted to have a why did I want a short take? I think I wanted one because it's like I don't want too much to edit. I just want to put it right up.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So
What it
we'll
comes
keep it
down to.
easy. I was just about to talk about your cute dog behind, so that I shouldn't do, for instance, as
Oh
well.
yeah, there he is. You're the
No.
dog. Who I think is probably like, okay, just get this over with so we can go for a walk.
Yeah.
I really need to evacuate my bowels.
All right. So intelligent remarks to the point. Yeah, there you go.
Well, I mean, it's a it's your it's a I think a valuable, strong like opinion piece. If I
Hmm.
were to get all, editorial about it, and I think the motivation is like sincere, and I think it's also right, correct in the in or right in the sense of like, yeah, we need to have this conversation. Um, to the point that you make that the futures are boring from a perspective that you're at, which is like, don't show me any more cyberpunk futures. Also, maybe less gooey, pieces of meat with tubes coming out of them. What kind of futures do we need in order to activate and really focus the energy of, thinking about what's next in a way that is more constructive, I guess. I don't know. I'm putting words in your mouth, but that's where my mind went when I read it, and it was just kind of like, yeah, to the heavy metal thing, like, fuck yeah, let's do this.
right words, no?
Yeah, I don't think we have any sort of ownership to those words because they're also yours. I do believe that's something you've been talking about yourself for the longest time. A lot of people have talked about this one way or another in their own words with their own frame of reference. And it's almost like the most obvious thing to say among, pure-hearted futurists at the moment that we need other futures. Even like the argument itself of it's futures, not future, it's
Yeah.
plural, like that's almost like a trope for us as well now. But how, like our question is, how do we wrap this in a way that reaches further than just the foresight futurist community as well? Any person, I think, has a vested interest in futures, right? Any person thinks of the future one way or another. So how do we bring that conversation somehow, yeah, to that layer, make it a bit more public, engage what we were telling you, I think, last time with the topics of innovation. Like, what the sort of place does that occupy in the topic of innovation when we keep hearing about those very cyberpunky cliches and sci-fi spaceships as like a sole reference for what guides innovation in general?
Very normative in that sense.
They're very
They're very normative. These images of futures that pre-exist and they're going to. Should I hold it?
I mean, I can interview.
Yeah, it's much better because when it's barely near you, you're very
All
faint.
right. No, I was saying to continue on what Cedric was saying to that, yeah, these futures that pre-exist, those tropes of future, they also end up being very normative in the sense that they they guide innovation, and then in the end you end up getting really one kind of innovation on it's really lacking innovation. True innovation.
And there's this like general sort of linearity of thinking about futures, which is, or the future with a capital F in this case, which is a bit dangerous because it seems we Wh- I I I recently got a chance to read Fully Automated Luxury Communism by Bastani. And there's this bit about the end of history and a reference to the end of history and the sort of perception of the world that we grew in, especially our generation, that is a sort of linear, ever modernizing, ever optimizing world. And I think this is what we're up against, this idea that innovation can no longer be super inventive, but has to be more or less iterative. We're here to optimize. Like, this is what reality demands. No need to revolutionize anything anymore, even though it's there in the sort of rhetorics. When people, the messaging, of innovations, like, oh, it's out of the box, groundbreaking, whatever. But in reality, it's always like a sort of step by step uh, agile approach to innovating, which on the one hand we don't want to discredit either. We do believe that this is absolutely necessary when you're sort of coming closer to issues you're trying to solve with practicalities of engineering and so on. But when it comes down to finding new avenues of progress and doing what we think design is good at, which is to mix economic, social, and technological variables into new directions and form
Mhm.
visions with those. This is kind of the place we would like to reclaim with that. Yeah. 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 You don't. Oh, yeah. Don't.
Yeah, I'm gonna say something. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I also think that like the other side of it is really sort of us thinking about how we want to work. And so we've been in this field for a while, and we've done a lot of projects, and with your own projects, you can always sort of do what you want. But with client work, it's often we're like we come in at a point where sort of the rules are already set very much. That happens often, and we thought about why is that the case, and how can we change that maybe. And I think this is sort of also at the start of our thinking about the new future archetypes.
Yeah. Um, so that this is like the underlying thesis of the essay, which everyone should read. It's super readable. It's not it's not so long that you kind of lose the thread. The thread is very it's more of I would say it's almost like more of a manifesto, I think. The edge of a manifesto because it's strongly opinionated and it's calling for action. Um, I think the tricky part i- is the kind of like, okay, so what do you mean? I mean, you give sort of like one example of what that might be like. You give the counter examples, like, kind of less of, then there's a short litany of things. Um, so I'm wondering, like, what, wait, did part two come out?
No, not yet, but it's
Okay,
I think
so there's
that's what you're about to to ask about. It's more the practicalities.
yeah, okay,
Like
so
how
that's
does it
good.
look like in
So
use?
having the practicalities, like something that people can get their can hook into, and so they start sensing into and really feeling in a way where they're like, okay, now I get it.
Yeah.
This is what we're so looking forward to that for sure. To the meta topic of this kind of call to action or reconsideration, there is also the that balance has been this is what is often on my mind, but it's on my mind quite a bit lately. Like the balance between the the making those futures, I guess, and the
Hmm.
making the futures is both from the perspective of I think the things that people like you guys and certainly me. I'll speak for myself. Certainly for me, is to to point to the thing that you're referring to and start guiding the conversation towards that. What do I mean by that? So almost saying like less cyberpunk, maybe even less solar punk. I don't know, something, but give me something, give me something, a direction and something that I'm aspiring to create. Make the things that feel like this is my approach. Make the things that feel like they've come from this different kind of future. Uh, so don't just tell me that we need different kind of futures. The metaphor I think of, I mentioned this the other day to a young kid who's who has a blog, and I was saying like how like when you're for me when you're riding a bike
Mm.
on like a technical trail or something like that, you're meant to you learn very quickly, don't look at the place you don't want to wind up because you will end up there. Like don't look at the rock or the overhang or the root system that you're like I don't want to mess with that thing because the longer you look at it and kind of ruminate on it, you find yourself over there and then over top your bike with a sore arm. So how do you show these things
Yeah.
so that people maybe who are less effective at creating the visions that start to draw people in, like, oh, okay, let's see, like this is the more because the more drones you show, the more people will be like, oh, it's going to be a droney future. The
Yeah.
more magical carpet, self-driving cars in perfectly seamless, kind of urban causeways, the more you're going to see that. It's
Yeah.
fascinating to me that there's that how effective it is just, it has been. The other thing to say is I think that this is also something important to keep in mind is that visions of future are somehow like kind of coordinated to generations, I guess, in the sense
Hmm.
that when you're growing up, when you're 3, 4, 5, 6, 11, 13, or whatever, you imagine you're shown visions of the future, things that feel like, oh, when I get to a certain, when I'm a normal human, I want to be a part of that. There was one image I saw, it was in the Discord. I was doing a whole bunch of stuff to capture all the images that are being posted in this one channel that's just images. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And one of them was this, clean cut white guy, kind of black and white, and he's got like a headphone of a particular era, basically Apollo NASA era. And
Yeah.
the little thing is like it's an ad for recruiting for JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And it's like a quote, something that's like, when I was a kid, I always, space travel was sci-fi. Now I'm actually living it. he wanted to be part
Yeah.
of that world that he probably saw in some, puppet show when he was a kid or some Saturday morning cartoon when he was a kid. I totally get that. I mean, I
Mhm.
definitely, if you think back, if I'm able to think back clearly, my whole life I've been trying to get back to that feeling, that kind of home of, watching Space 1999 or Star Trek or whatever. And that's why I'm kind of, my head's where it's at. And I think that's the same thing. So I think part of the work is not only for us and for like the big companies or whatever, you have to understand, like you're talking to a client, you're trying to understand their consciousness and their visions. You could probably very easily trace it back to what they feel, them trying to get back home, speaking more
Yeah.
psychoanalytically than anything else. I want to get back to the feelings that I had when I was a kid. And it might not be kind of tech related necessarily because they're like head
Yeah.
of, strategic innovation. It might be, they might be like, man, I wound up where in a great spot where I get to play with the things that I enjoyed playing with when I was a kid. I still got to deal with HR and all the other stuff, but that's okay for the bargain. So I start thinking about what are ways in which, people like us can not only engage clients, but engage the under 16 or whatever
Yeah.
crowd. What are the fun things you can
Absolutely.
do in your communities, or whatever? And how can you, do that in all the various ways in which, generally we're pretty good at, which is creating these compelling,
Hmm.
uh, oftentimes, largely visual representations of possibility and, in the ways that we want. I'm not saying like make a cartoon show, although that's kind of interesting. Um, you get what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
a D&D table set or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, but it's so you're hinting at a sort of I'm trying to think of how to unpack it so it's not too much at once. But okay, I'll start with there's a bit of a dichotomy that you're mentioning here, which is that between the authorship side of the work that we end up doing, uh, that has, yeah, that has like a strong wish to be publicly appealing and to even venture, I would dare to say, on the grounds of new alternative sci-fi, new sort of seeds of a new sort of avenue of sci-fi and multiplying those stories. There is the service aspect of it that we believe in, of course, that we think it serve innovation both in policy and new product development for sure. Especially if we manage to strike this balance carefully between, like you said, like appealing to even the kid inside of you that's into this idea of the future, that you can create an emotional sort of connection with the work itself rather than use bland procedural sort of scenario driven works that will tell you if this then that, if this then that, if this then that, that you form some kind of bond with the world that you're given, and that's the authorship speaking to the service side of the work. And so then it triggers a third sort of greater topic of interest for us, which is the methodology that this belongs to. Because so of course we use a lot of aspects of foresight. We use a lot of aspects of design in how we work. This is what sort of makes us navigate these two areas and balance them as much as we can between the authorship and the service side of things. But it made us wonder about, like even the logic of scenario driven work. Why with the basic assumption that like we hear all the time about the trends of the year, the scenarios that belong to the strands for the year, and there's a whole business model sort of around this idea of renewing this package constantly every year, new set of trends, new set of scenarios for corporate clients and governments alike. And the idea with using archetypes is to say, well, how about we don't discard the scenarios ever if they still hold true? As we see, a lot of scenarios can very easily still be used one year after the next. A lot of trends are still relevant. What if we package this a bit differently? We put it into like one little world, and instead of shoving everything under the rug and then sort of, or rather renaming it slightly the year after into a new scenario, we keep on building this and we build this collectively and we iterate and we edit, etc. And you could say, well, if it's no longer relevant, you can just then discard it and build a new one. Build a new one that's relevant, see what's missing. But so our assumption with this, and this is still, I mean, on the creative level and creative and research driven side of it, is that we can create a framework, for lack of a better word, because I know there's a lot of frameworks out there with futures, but I say a collective framework around futures and design, where we build this library and this collective archive that creates a fixed vocabulary we can all refer to. Instead of confusing and changing names and renaming trends, renaming little artifacts and stuff, no, we collect them. We
Mm.
create a common territory to keep a conversation going, both within the public and the private. And that's sort of our hope with approaching it in this sort of packaging around new future archetypes. I don't know if you, yeah.
Yeah, one one thought that comes to my mind when listening to Cedric explain this is that well, there's two aspects that I think are quite important there. There's notion of constantly being able to evolve these scenarios, these little futures, and that comes together with the notion of scale. And because we're not, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we're trying to invent a new. You were talking about cyberpunk, solarpunk earlier. Those are big generic movements with that. They're well established in the sense that when you say one of these words, I already know what it looks like. I already know what artifacts exist. I already know what kind of social situations I'm expecting to encounter. And this is, I mean, on the one hand, it can be extremely useful because there are collective imaginaries that create a common vocabulary that can be very useful because you don't need to re-explain everything. But for the same reason, they can also be very detrimental because you have this common vocabulary and you don't necessarily need to evolve it so much. So where we want to operate is I think at a scale that's a little bit smaller and that allows us to have stepping stone. If we manage to coin a big,
I have just
a-
like a little nuance on
of course, there's nuance to that, but my point is that also these cyberpunk, solarpunk are collective works. There's not one person who comes with, I mean, yeah, with also nuance there, but where I think we want to like throw some stones that can be used as stepping stones towards a different kind of aesthetics, a different kind of discourse, a different kind of possible future, and that we can evolve, that we can add extra stones to this, and we can build something that keeps on evolving and that keeps on adapting to the change of reality also.
Mhm.
And then we can use these as sounding boards when someone comes at us with a different kind of challenge that we maybe haven't anticipated and that would make sense in this little future in a box. And then we can probe what would happen if you bring this kind of concern, this kind of context, this kind of stakeholder, this kind of industry into this sort of already defined new future archetype, and that has already rules, that already has sort of aesthetics. So it's something a bit more tangible that you can test different ideas against. And yeah, here comes the nuance.
Yes, the nuance is that I never meant to say that this is just us as authors initiating these things. It would be, of course, glorious to invent the new cyberpunk, the new whatever, but that's never been our intention here. It's to create a model where this can happen collectively. And so
Mm.
our questioning is more along the lines of, okay, what's the practical framework to do this, to make it happen? How do we document it, etc.? And this is what we're developing at the moment. It's not as much about our worlds being ours, as much as yes, we can create like an impulse, we can create seeds, and we're willing to share them as a resource to continue the work around them. But yeah, archetypes should not belong to one person, one group, one company. Absolutely not. Which then triggers the next question, speaking of practicality, is how does it operate? How do we license it? And in our mind, it's something a bit like a font or imagery that you can license assets to different people you work with. You can grant them the right to work with it. But if you work with them on a new archetype within the confines of a project to make sure that this archetype is then accessible to others, even though they can be granted perpetual rights to it, right? And so that's kind of the logic. And what we're thinking of a lot those days is what are assets and what is a workflow when you develop future worlds. So if you use 3D graphics or things like this, how do you make your stuff usable in different pipelines, whether it needs to be interactive in a game-like environment? Does it need to be renderable in high quality? Can it be 3D printed? And you keep these sort of like possibilities open. And I think borrowing a bit from asset creation in video game is a cool thing to do because there's like a really interesting inherent logic in managing large asset databases. How do we give access to it and so on? And it can be like graphics, I don't know, text, a lot of text written, bibliographies is part of the kit. So that's what we're thinking a lot about nowadays is what makes it, right? What is in the repository that we can give you access to?
Super
I think
interesting.
that's
I mean, it sure makes me think. Oh, sorry, go on, go on. Yep.
go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Um, I really want to hear what you have to say.
Okay.
Well, no, I also forgot. Um, yeah, actually, true. What do I want to? Assets, aesthetics. Right.
Libraries of assets.
This is a 3D video game is really interesting as a
I was I was thinking about the assets and the notion of mods of video games because of course it's not at all contradictory with reusing the pre-existing aesthetics or imaginaries. It's completing them with different yeah, adding new questions to them, adding new situations, and trying to it's kind of branching out in a way.
And so if you develop assets this way, you could very well imagine. I guess the nuance is that you could build also merge literal video game assets with a particular item from a particular future. The difference is that we would always have a greater narrative attached to it, and thereby every object, asset, point of entry becomes a point of entry to a greater idea of the future. And you can trace back its origin, so to speak, and visit the rest of it. And if we could diffuse also futures this way, would be interesting. No? Don't know.
I feel like I have to add something we
Yes.
should have said in the beginning, because there's this double meaning of new future archetype, which we ended up with. So first, it's sort of this, what most of this essay is about, this critique of sort of archetypal futures in a way, the flying cars and all that. And sort of the, how do you say, like diagnosis in a way that these are in a way have become detached, like from the futures that are actually useful now, and they are kind of more distractions in our minds, like something we kind of go back to all the time. We might think of in an analytical ways or in creative ways about kind of futures we need or we can expect in certain times. And when we at some point try to imagine them, we always default back to kind of these images, these tropes. So that's one side. And the other thing is when we talk about near future archetypes, is sort of like the framework we propose to sort of work on creating And I think this is like something that's really an ambition, and we can't say we can sort of fulfill that necessarily because these robots and so on and flying cars are cultural archetypes, right? So at some point culture has to resonate with them, has to adopt them, and of course that's nothing we can do. But what sort of our attempt is here is to close a gap in a way. So we have the feeling that often in Future's work, just what I just said, these images are not really tackled in the end. So you kind of you do all the strategic work, all the analytical work, and in the end, sort of what people think about are still they're still using these archetypes they already have in mind, and it seems like stagnant in a way.
Okay, sure.
And so the idea is, if we talk about near future archetypes as a framework, we are talking about creating worlds that sort of think about certain dynamics. The world could evolve. They are testing certain directions, and they're trying to find expressions for them, to think about how things materialize, how like we talk about them aesthetically, how we perceive them. So it's kind of trying to do the work to close the gap between the futures we sort of create analytically or in response to sort of the current developments, and the experience we have, the imagery we use, and so on.
Yes.
So this is really what we're trying to do, I think.
And I think that's really important. I mean, just that connection between the analytic and the feeling that drives people towards that. I think, my thesis is, which I think is sort of works to a certain degree, is that you got to help someone feel the thing before you can get really analytic about it. Despite, what people might want to assume, like, no, we think rationally about things before. And I think all decisions are made just basically, I would sort of say, just to be provocative, based on us trying to get back home. It's the same thing, like get back to something that we experienced. I don't want to get all psychoanalytic, but something that we experienced when we were, at a very impressionable and like kind of maybe, fun moment. And I don't know if we're like really super connected to that. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
I just like I just remembered something, and I wanted to say, which is that like closing that gap between sort of the experience, the aesthetics, and sort of the analytical mind or something like that. This is really something that takes time. It's like also like the thing with experiences is you can't guarantee them. You can offer them, and
Yes.
and sometimes something clicks, but it's not like a guaranteed process. It's something you have to do again and again, and then maybe something happens or not. And I think it has to do with, on the one side, like immersing in these things again and again. Like if you like, the discovery is not just like a 30 minutes thing. That's one aspect, and the other is also like working on these projects. Like if we work on a scenario project and then we work on it like for weeks or months or something, and then it's over. And it's like, okay, so we made a film, we made like an interactive experience, I don't know what, and then it's delivered, and we have the feeling, okay, so first it's really about working with that now. So we want to use it more. We want to kind of, yes, kind of shift more towards working with these scenarios and evolving them in sort of a process with other people. And the other part is that this closing this gap between the aesthetics and the other work, this really takes time. And it's kind of frustrating to kind of, just stop a project, switch to the next one while there's kind of still things unresolved and it can still be useful. There's like so much stuff you have to build up until something becomes actually useful.
Yes.
And then we just thought we have to keep working on that and not discard it all the time.
You just made a point I wanted to make, but there's one little thing that I wanted to add. Yeah. One other thing I wanted to add is that what's really interesting with continuing to work with features that we've spent time designing and refining is that they acquire their own rules, they acquire their own way of functioning, which isn't the way that our current reality works. In some, there you might end up with different technological bottlenecks. You might end up with different kind of cultures that will shift movement in different directions. And this is really interesting because that means that the same thing that the same prompt you would give to one or the other of these new future archetypes will resonate differently, and then it gives you different and I think just as valuable insights about what it is that you're trying to bring in. And so there's two aspects. There's how and why we created all of these, and that's just the reality of our practice. Like Bent was saying, that we do this through our practice. We develop little bits of futures that we use, and then we put them aside, and it's a bit frustrating, a bit sad. There's more that could be explored through these, and the other aspect is what do we do with them once, if we decide to pick them up, to not leave them aside. What's their value? How do we present them to the next person who can sort of like poke at them in different ways? How will someone completely different from the original person who asked us to create this, or the original context that in which it rose, how someone completely different can push it in a completely different direction? And this is exactly what we want to trigger as much as possible, like this kind of surprise for ourselves, also like moving these futures in completely unexpected directions, because we'll talk to someone who will see it in a completely different ways. And yeah,
Yeah.
and because they will hurt themselves, or like bump against different rules, they
Yeah.
will. Yeah.
No, no, but it's super interesting because this is the core of our thinking here, is how there's a lot of exploration when we think of futures. And if I go back to frameworks, most frameworks in futures are about exploring, doing collaborative world building, etc., which is amazing. It's a great thing to do. I think people are happy when you do that. A mix of role play, a mix of world building is super fun. And you get to results really freaking fast with that too. It's true.
Yeah.
We've done that quite a lot. But now there's also a need for what comes after, and what Bent was also hinting at before, and the continuity that Regis just described. And to us, it sort of relies on a crucial hinge point. And this hinge between the exploration and, let's say, what separates an exploration from an actual strategy? How do you make use of these ideas of the future, seek friction, play on that game board that has already been designed with different actors, with different incentives, and different things that they're after? If we're talking about innovation, whether it's, again, social, economic, product, doesn't matter. And how do we focus on playing the game, not building the game again and again and again, playing the game onto this new platform? And so, yeah, we usually refer that to as the big hinge, let's say. And it's, as far as we know, it's a difficult step even in foresight work in general. How do you move from building something, a vision, and then implement it or use it and bring it further? And as far as we're concerned, we often have to deal with a bit of that's the issue, I would say, with the authorship aspect of it. there's a difference of perception when you deliver something like Bent was describing, an experience, film, that it becomes an act of authorship that nobody wants to really take possession of. It's, it's like people feel a distanciation from a piece because, oh God, it's someone made it. It's great. We can watch it, we can consume it, but God forbid we reuse it or act within it. And so I don't know. I guess we need to borrow a bit from like fandom movements or like what Regis was saying with the mods on games
Yeah.
to find ways to invite people in.
I
And
think
this
that's
is,
so I just want to index on that because the
yeah,
thing I want to say earlier is related, which is
please go ahead.
uh the I learned this from a friend of mine who works at a large kind of, I don't know what they do exactly, but kind of visual design studio, mostly commercial. And um he was like, dude, you have no idea how much how the attention on manga. He's like, here's a whole app like that's just manga for manga fans. He's like, it's huge. You wouldn't necessarily see it because, generationally, I see the edges of it because my nephews are so into it. I mean, they will. Uh, I mean, it's just nuts. I learn a lot from them. Like when they came and visit, they're like, we got to go to Japantown. We got to go to a bookstore. We got to find some manga. And so that's just, one of those things where it's like, okay, so here's a whole generation that's growing up with this vision of, an adjacent kind of universe based on certain, visual tropes, obviously, I think, and then also all the other things. I think it's amazing. I'm just like, wow, that's so cool. Um, and there is the thing that I was being shown, this friend of mine showed me was some kind of like framework of some sort where people are creating their own manga, and then it gets into this app kind of community, very large community, and the things are like rated and ranked somehow so that your manga could actually be elevated, within this. So, you become whatever, manga famous or whatever. Um, so that in my mind also connects to something that, so I've been doing some, as part of my AI design fiction research studio. It's like I did text stuff, and now I'm kind of like looking at doing visual image based stuff and AI, and just wondering like what are the kinds of creation tools that might exist in an AI future that would just be not as, just be like normal.
Hmm.
Not thinking so much commercially, just like what can you do that is not yet expected or normal. And when you sort of go in that world just as a neophyte and start trying to, start playing in it and start understanding it, and kind of you get involved in the various communities of practice of different sorts. I mean, I'm just really and I think in a productive and generative way, just kind of fucking around. So, I've got the big computer that I used to use for 3D modeling and rendering is now doing AI based image stuff,
Yeah.
either bespoke or like with comfy UI and stuff like. And so when you get into that world, and I start thinking about what you guys are talking about, like what are the um what's the platform, or what are the tools people playing with? My mind immediately goes to the tradable artifacts. Maybe they're not, dot OBJ files or whatever. Maybe they're workflows, maybe they're
Hmm.
LoRa's, and maybe they're models,
Yeah.
like LLMs that people
Yeah.
either
Yeah.
make or they fine tune. And and you're already starting to see, you go on Hugging Face and you look at especially the text-based models, and there'll be
Yeah.
fine tunes of the
With tone
baseline
and
models, and they'll be
yeah.
like, this one is like is all sci-fi. You're trying to figure out why and how, not the
Yeah.
how so much. I mean, the process for doing that, but you're like, what makes this more sci-fi? And you start playing with it,
Mm.
as a text-based thing, giving it prompts. Oh, and the other thing, like another artifact is like prompt, because those are tradable assets now. Like you see people in the, the sort of more indelicate kind of
Hmm.
subreddits, and they're like, dude, what was your prompt? What was your workflow? And
Yeah.
they'll
Yeah.
be tagged workflow provided,
Yeah.
or prompt provided.
I
You
like
be
the
careful
idea
when
of
you go in those communities because it's kind of like, whoa, Jesus, what the hell's
yeah.
going on
Yeah.
here? But otherwise, just thinking, yeah, sorry, everything starts with porn. Like all
No,
innovation.
it's really interesting. I mean, it's something we thought a bit about, like how to train our own LoRa's
Hmm.
and build different libraries of style and meaning, for lack of a better word, that belong to those different archetypes as also part of a package. Um, I'm myself sort of expecting a bit more. Um, I don't know. I have the feeling that we're bound to also reducing the initial footprint of files. So when you're talking about an OBJ, you might as well, with the right style guides, etc., a prompt or like more of a skeleton, like a skeleton file, rebuild assets, vary assets, and things like that. Yeah, and have like a sort of material culture aesthetic pasted over it. It's super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that very well. I mean, we're thinking about it as well, but it's just there's so many different dimensions where we could build assets and build this repository.
Yeah. It's even
Yeah,
fun to
yeah, yeah.
imagine that, even so doing the thing because you actually want the thing to exist and be functional in a particular way, but just
Yeah.
imagining this would be my instinct. I'm not telling you what to do. My instinct would be like, well, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but let me try to trace the contours of it by imagining that there's a world with this.
Hmm.
I don't want to over-index even on what it's called. It might not be a repository. It might be, imagine a world where Hugging Face isn't a company, but it's like a adjective. Which Hugging Face are you on to get that?
Yeah.
And it's a place where you can kind of where it's assumed that this is where you go to get maybe it's not literally a list of assets, but it's the tooling to create assets.
Yeah.
Like like a really great set of technical illustration markers, you know,
Hmm.
that and you see, like people will have those sets of all the Copic markers. I don't know if that's still a thing, but people used to do that
The
and it would be like
Copics. Oh, yeah,
it'd be
yeah.
like, oh, you must be you're creative sort of. You got that.
Yeah.
You got all the colors.
I was it makes me think also how can you sort of replicate through this kind of workflow? Can you replicate a sort of like social pressure in the sense of things that would naturally draw you to output a specific kind of aesthetic or a specific kind of function or um, that makes Cedric very giggly for some reason.
Yeah.
Tell us.
I don't know. When you mentioned it, I started imagining that you can infer, like a political climate and different,
Yeah,
that's what I mean, like
exactly.
different economies and sort of resolve them down to an aesthetic
But also
and
things
the kind
that
of objects that would come out.
also sort of like drive any kind of new attempt at creating something through some forces that are inherent to the world that you've built
Mm.
that will make it, that will shove it more in this direction or that direction, sort of like the natural forces that push us to do something rather than something else because this is tradition or peer pressure or social styles, culture, etc. This thing is not socially acceptable. That other thing is. You seem to have something in mind about what I mean.
I okay, to be like full disclosure, the designer in me partly kind of disagrees to that as well, because for me it's like belonging to this forever quest that we can replicate reality
Mm.
with perfection, etc., which I absolutely do not subscribe to or believe in. No, I think that there's talent in our direction, in like being able to put images to words and words to images. Like that, you need some people that have the ability to even understand the visuals to tell you about them. It cannot be fully automated without someone to do the sense making in the middle.
Yeah, for sure.
And so there's always going to be like augmented workflows around that. But to curate things that are truly interesting, relating to their context and so on, I don't know, like I really believe in the work of storytellers still here. Art directors, storytellers. It's so cheesy to say that storytelling is like this needed
But
practice.
I don't think we disagree. I think boundaries in general have a value also in narrative space. You can wiggle, you can still find some wiggle rooms within boundaries and within forces that will push you towards one way or another, because then you have to imagine how you would function around them. If your goal is to find a way around, then it's interesting that there might be a boundary that you have to overcome, other rather than a big free for all where everything's possible.
Yeah, I mean, okay. In that sense, that's a really interesting remark, actually, because you're imagining working with the machine as negotiation practice, like a sort of circular, argumentative sort of practice. The only sort of bracket I would add to it, or like a little footnote to it, is that I don't believe in currently generative models' ability to generate things anew. If that makes any sense. It's always invariably trained on something that needs to pre-exist.
All right,
Yeah, it can be your DM.
we're gonna stop it here.
Yeah, sorry. It's like,
We're now
let's
we're
argue
now on a
about
different
AI for
train.
an
We're now
hour
on a
now.
different train. And I totally broke my promise to keep it. No,
Yeah,
okay.
sorry, man.
It's all right. No,
We
it's good. It's
we
good.
helped you break it too.
Um, cool. Thanks, you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank
Good
you.
stuff. I'm looking forward to part two. When's that gonna drop?
Yeah. And then we can talk about part two if you want.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that imminent, or or is it
Well, it should be more imminent than it is.
oh, okay. Okay, I
Yeah.
get how you guys work.
Let's see. Let's try what we can get done before.
Yeah, when is it due, bound?
Don't put me on the spot here.
It's less imminent than the walk of the dog who's been super chill and extremely patient and who really needs is so cute.
Good doggo. Yeah. All
All right, you
right.
guys. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having us again.
Yeah, of course. Looking forward to part two whenever it comes out.
Yeah. Well, we're looking forward to your feedback on it.
Yeah, nice. All right,
Alrighty.
fellas. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you. You
Okay,
too. Well, your day, technically. Yeah.
that's right. It's the day. Just getting started. Take
All
care.
right. Ciao. Take care.